What is good, everyone? Welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast. My name is Nick Engvall, and before we get into today's episode, I'm going to ask a small favor from all of you. We've uploaded over 350 episodes of the show, and we're slowly creeping up on 600,000 downloads. I honestly can't even wrap my head around it. That is insane. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of this journey with us. If you could take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, hit that follow button on Spotify, and give us a rating, it would be greatly appreciated. I'm looking forward to taking the show to new levels in the coming months with more guests from the community, talks with industry professionals, and deeper dives into the sneaker stories that shape this obsession we are all so passionate about. And your support is going to make that happen, so thank you in advance. One last thing before we get into this episode, do the right thing, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a compliment will take you, and we all know how good it feels to be on the receiving end of some appreciation.
What up, what up? Welcome back to the Sneaker History Podcast. My name's Nick, with my guys Rohit and Robbie. Talk about some sneakers, some releases, some sad stories in the state of basketball and in baseball, and some fall sneakers, I guess. Maybe some good fall colorways we're kind of leaning into, it sounds like. But how you guys doing?
I'm good. I'm always jealous when I don't wear a hat and I see Rohit's hair, and I'm just like, man, that man got a head of hair that I do not.
I'm
and
sending
my
you
new
my
name
vibes.
is Rob Bonnie in an accent. Rob Bonnie.
Raboni.
So
Like
there's that.
wait, Raboni. Oh, perfect.
There's
No,
that.
I was gonna say I am always here for as many aliases as you can come up with. I think if we were the Wu-Tang Clan, Robbie is very much, and I mean this in the most respectful way, the old dirty bastard, because he's got so many aliases, so many different personas. And I guess if we want to go cross sport, I'll say he's the Mick Foley of the podcast, because he can be Cactus Jack, he can be Dude Love, he can be Mankind. And yeah, and Nick, I don't know what to make. You're not Vince McMahon. I'll say that.
Thank God.
I'm excited to watch that documentary on Netflix. I don't want to digress, but I'm going to get to it.
The same.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's start with basketball news. D Rose announced that he's hanging it up for good, stepping away from the game, all of those fun things that happen after basketball. Do you guys feel like the first thought of D Rose retiring, is it you're happy for him, or is it like, man, he could have, like, injuries, you just default to the injuries?
So for
You go
me,
ahead,
I
Rohit.
think, yeah, I was going to say, if you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would say, oh man, what could have been? And you could come up with some sort of hot take about how he's going to be the only MVP that may not get into the Hall of Fame because of the, I guess, the cruel nature of his injuries. But nowadays, as a dad, and maybe that's it, and I use a lot of being a dad now to justify aspects of my personality, I'm just happy he got to make it as much as he did, and he gave us the memories that he did. If you want to take it from a cynical basketball perspective, yes, he's this generation's Penny Hardaway in terms of he's going to be the player that we're going to tell all our grandkids and nieces and nephews about, that you may know that he's got a sneaker, but you really had to be there in the moment to understand and appreciate his brilliance. But kudos to him, man. I think at this point, anytime somebody is able to retire and enjoy the post-retiring activities of their loins, so to speak, you're always going to be happy for them.
So it's like a starfish. So like happiness, sadness. The third point is like, man, he's been so injury ridden for so long. Not that I don't care, but he could have retired 3 years ago. We would have given him the same love. Like, he could have called it a wrap any point the last 5 years, and he'd get the exact same love. Because of point 4, and Rohit brought it up, the whole MVP and Hall of Fame thing, he's leaps and bounds better than... He climbed higher than Penny Hardaway did. He climbed higher than most players who did have careers cut short. Like, we always talk about Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson didn't win an MVP. We always talk about Penny. Didn't win an MVP. You can go on and on of people who've been great and cut short. But Derrick, in what now 77 years of the league, in one of the 77 years ever, he was the best on earth. So it's like, damn, that's crazy. That's awesome. And then, so I think he's a bona fide Hall of Famer just because there's Hall of Famers in there who never even got there. So it's like, and the eye test doesn't lie. Like, you can eye test Mike Bibby and like, yeah, he had a great 2 years, right? I mean, elite 2 years, but like, eye test Derrick Rose's 3 years, and it's like, holy shit, that's extraterrestrial. And then the fifth point, popularizing the 0.5 in sneakers. Like the Derrick Rose 4.5 is still one of my favorite basketball designs ever, to kind of get like a leopard print, jaguar print on a shoe and have it not look stupid. But like, to have all the weird numbers in shoes and to use area codes and 0.5s, pioneer in confusing footwear. Like you cannot his footwear line is topographic. It's not a straight line. It doesn't move in but awesome. He revolutionized how many ways you could sell one signature athlete, because when you really think about it, he was single-handedly not only fighting Miami Heat basketball, but he was Adidas basketball, one man fighting every other brand. You had the MVP and nobody else, what it felt like, right? You have an old-ass T-Mac who's doing nothing. So, like, you had to sell a D-Rose, Dwight Howard shoes, Gilbert Arenas shoes. All these failures, right? They keep coming and going. But Derrick and the D-Rose line, you got to shape that thing and make it fit at different price points and be an entire basketball. It was basically an entire basketball division just through D-Rose because no one else was popping.
And I think, to your point as well, Robbie, whenever we think about sneakers and how they intersected with the cultural inflection points of the league, the first non-Nike thing a lot of people, I think of from this particular era is the rise of Steph Curry and Under Armour. But before that happened, you had Derrick Rose. And to the point that my esteemed co-host also made, you saw one man and one man alone take on the biggest super team of its sports history and went pound for pound for them, with Carlos Boozer, Joakim Noah, and a butcher named Tom Thibodeau. And it's one of those things where I will probably never forgive Tom Thibodeau for overplaying Derrick Rose as much as he did. But like Robbie had also mentioned, he truly was one of these players that even how you describe his game is how you describe the player, where he wasn't here for a long time, but man, was it a good time. He was straight line, arguably the most explosive player I've ever seen on a basketball court. And
so,
go ahead.
He also did against Boss, like the big three in Miami is like the big shining one. He took Kevin Garnett and the big three to like game 7, I think 2 years in a row in the earlier rounds. Like, you did not want to meet Derrick Rose. It took 3 Hall of Famers, 2 different sets of them to like keep Derrick Rose down.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, my favorite player of all time is Allen Iverson. And most of the reason for that is just like his personality, his emotions, his everything, hard on the sleeve, like the epitome of that. And I like Derrick Rose is exactly that, but he's so much more reserved. It's more relatable, I think, than even Allen Iverson. So when he came into the league, I mean, even before he was in the league, like I was going after his college PEs. Like I have a pair of his college pro models, like I have probably 60 pair plus of Derrick Rose shoes from that first 5 years run. And those aren't shoes that people were like, they did well, but it was not stuff that people cared about. Right. But I was just like, man, this guy is incredible. And I think the thing that we forget about around Derrick Rose is like, he was two things. He was so emotionally invested in the product that he was putting out. I remember this is probably 2012. I might be off on the year, but when the D-Rose 3 came out, he literally broke down crying at the launch of the event. And it's like, when was the last time you saw somebody care that much? 3 shoes, not even, to Robbie's point, there was halves in there. So 5 shoes into your signature line, and you're still that emotional to release a sneaker. I think that is like completely missing from sneakers now, because it's just so run of the mill, right? Like it's a formula for everybody. And I think it was so important to him, and it translated so much into like the stuff that he was doing on court, because it was an emotional, like even the way he plays, right? Like he was just, to Rose's point, like arguably one of the greatest to ever play. Like when you think of him, he is the most explosive player I can possibly think of. And on the flip side of that actually set off a whole trend in footwear with Adidas, because he started out on the team signature stuff in the early days, then got into his signature shoes. But right before his signature shoes came out, the Crazy Light line came out. And that was like an absolute change of direction. It was like minimalism for basketball shoes, kind of thinking like running shoes, how it's like, oh, we're going to go down to like these it's basically a sock with a tiny sole shoe. That's what the Crazy Light was, but it still had cushioning. It just wasn't like a long-term cushioning, right?
It would
the
fall
shoes were
apart
like
after a couple months.
I mean, I still have
a bad way.
I still have a few pair that I played in that are all right.
Hey, Nick Engvall here. You've reached the end of this episode. Unless, of course, you're a member of our Patreon. That's how we keep this show independent, and it also gives you access to exclusive content like videos, podcasts, and all sorts of other stuff within our community. Head to patreon.com/sneakerhistory to join and listen to the rest of this episode.